What's up, everybody? Axe Wizard here. Long time no see. Great news! My computer is fixed. I ordered a new motherboard, and thankfully that was the only component so far that's been compromised. I was worried the processor was bad too, but yeah, don't let my house get too humid, I guess. Anyway, so I've been making my own tabletop RPG for my boys. So before I start diving into this system that I made, let me talk about why I started making it. So, as you all probably know if you're watching this channel, I love the Cairn tabletop RPG system. I think it's great. I love first edition and second edition. But I don't really have anybody to play with. I have my boys on the weekend, my two sons. And I have an eldest and a youngest. And they both have very different wants or desires when it comes to what they want in a role-playing game. So, for example, my eldest really wants an immersive, like, story-driven, like, narrative-focused role-playing, exciting intrigue, adventure, that kind of stuff. And then my youngest basically just wants to play Grand Theft Auto with dice. That's what he wants to do. So every time that I try to have a session with them, what ends up happening is I use all the second edition features to make like an awesome world and a bunch of story hooks. We roll characters that the boys are excited about, and then as they meet up in like the starter town in whatever region I rolled up, and then they're asking about the features and the locales of nearby around. And then my youngest will just go up and say, I want to pants that priest, or I want to go pickpocket the king or something, right? Completely wrecking ball like everything that I've built, which is fine. I'm trying to make an enjoyable experience for the players. But then my eldest is getting frustrated because he wants to like actually go, hey, why is there a giant crystal in the sky with a dark cloud at its base? Like, why is that? I want to go check it out. Like, people have been disappearing. Oh, weird. I wonder if they're in there. What can we do about that? And then my youngest is just like, oh, he's just committing crimes. That's all he wants to do. And to try to make the world feel more real, it's like, I do have some consequences. Like the guards start chasing them and they catch them. And then he wants to fight the guards. Okay, there's a lot of them. There's a lot more of them than you. And then it just ends up being frustrating because the youngest doesn't get to do what he wants to do. The oldest doesn't get to do what he wants to do. And then I spent all this time preparing something just to not get explored. So it's just a frustrating experience all around. Okay, so why don't you just do like Cairn, except more combat focused? Well, you can do that. I kind of did that with my guards adventure that I wrote a while ago now, but I still have it here too. In my guards adventure, they're presented with various scenarios that they can take either way. They can resolve the situation amicably, or they could throw down and arrest people, which is my youngest was all about. And you know what? It was kind of fun. So I was like, what would make a good story, but also what would be a happy medium for my two players here, for both of my sons? One likes story and meaning and depth, and the other likes carnage and mayhem. How do I make those mesh? So I decided, well, what if the story is you're just, I don't know, slaves that got taken and now you're fighting gladiators. It's like the movie The Gladiator, right? Where like Maximus gets taken and he's basically a slave and he has to fight in the fighting pits and the arenas. And eventually, it starts out like you get to earn your freedom. If you become like champion or whatever, you can eventually buy your freedom. was like, okay, that's kind of a good premise, right? And then, so it's interesting, it's deep, it's got certainly a big story hook, and then it's got depth and gravity, and then there's combat, baby. The whole purpose is combat. You gotta kill, right? So I decided to make a Gladiator system. So I call this Gladiator's Glory and Disgrace. That's what I'm going to call it. Everything you see here is a work in progress, including the art. I'm going to have my eldest do the art for me. But so this is just placeholder stuff that I made with like Hero Forge and Eldritch Foundry. And then I just basically cut it out, removed the background, and then I put a hand-drawn filter over it to make it look like it was somewhat sketched, you know? But this isn't going to be the final art in the product. I say product. It's just going to be a download on like itch.io or something once I get it done. I would like to eventually make like a, not really a box set, I guess, but the way I envision it, yeah, probably would be a box set. So let's talk about what this system is. What influences I guess what inspirations did I take from that influenced me when making this? So obviously Cairn is a big influence, but you won't really see too much of it in here. Also, Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder were influences. The big complaint that I had, I was trying to make Cairn, like when I started visualizing this game, you know, Cairn is determined by what you have on your person. And it didn't feel right having a backpack with 10 slots in the arena, you know? So I figured, okay, well, what can you have? Well, if you just only had, like, say, 4 slots, like what's on your body as far as armor, and then either hand, like 3 slots, that's really not much to go. So you would just be attacking with your weapon nonstop, and that would be the end of it, right? Not much intrigue and, like, options, or it's kind of hard to have dynamic gameplay with just I attack and I just keep rolling damage and eventually somebody dies, right? Stakes are high. I do like the danger that Cairn presents, to where any fight could be your last. I do like that danger aspect of it. I also like there's many things that I like about Cairn, but I don't think I could use a lot of it for what I envisioned this Gladiator game to be. So I started looking at Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. And a few things I liked, mostly took from Pathfinder, is I liked the action economy of Pathfinder, where it's like you got 3 action points, and then you can spend your actions however you want. Some abilities cost like 1 to 3 actions. You can move, you can pick stuff up, you can throw things. Like, it gives you a bunch of things that you can do. But the thing I didn't like about Pathfinder is that, like, everything was defined, and I kind of feel myself sliding down that rabbit hole with this system. And then I also I guess not stole, but I was inspired by Daggerheart. I haven't played that system yet. It's Critical Role's new system that they just brought out, and they're starting to play it with their Age of Umbra series that they got going on, their little mini-series. And I've been kind of watching it, and I've been watching some videos on it in my spare time, and I was really intrigued with the 2d12 dice system, where one die is designated as hope and the other die is designated as fear. I really like that idea. I also like the ideas of kind of like how they give you resources for both the players and the dungeon master or the GM to use. So hope for the players, fear for the GM. So I kind of stole all that, not completely. There are some parts of Daggerheart. Daggerfall is a different game. There's some parts of Daggerheart that I don't know if I like. So for example, they got rid of the initiative system basically. And I was going to try to do that, but I keep worrying that with how I'm doing the 3 action economy, that it'd be hard to determine whose turns who. So I just decided for right now, I'm keeping the basic initiative system that like D&D and Pathfinder have. And anyway, let's talk about what this is. So if we go to Character creation. Character creation is stupid simple. Oh, the other feature of this system that makes it different that I also stole from Daggerheart is I like the fact that they had cards. So I made cards. So I have a character card here, which you'll see in a bit. But yeah. This is my oldest's first one. He named it Gladiator instead of Gladiator. He's not glad, he's mad, Dad. I'm like, okay. So, yeah. Let's talk about character creation. So, Gladiator's Glory and Disgrace, a game meant for one facilitator, which I'm going to call the Arbiter, similar to how Cairn, the GM is referred to as the Warden. In this system, I'm going to call it the Arbiter. And then at least one player or Gladiator. Now, when I started writing this, I was like, Gladiator kind of also refers to not only the players, but their components, or not components, opponents as well. Because you could also be fighting other gladiators, right? So character creation, super simple. You pick a name, okay? So I have some sample names here, like Brutus, Ignacio, Cato, Felix, Gaius, Ferox, Severus, Quintus, Victor, right? There's like... You can pick any name you want, really. I mean, my oldest named him Gladiator, and I forgot what my youngest named it. It was probably something silly. Yeah. Okay, hang on. Those are my NPCs. I just named them 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is kind of funny. I can't read that handwriting anyway. So once you pick a name, you got to roll your attributes. So similar to Cairn, how there's only 3 attributes of strength, dexterity, and wisdom, I liked having the 3 attributes as opposed to like the 6 that D&D, Pathfinder, and I think Daggerheart has. So the 3 stats I decided on for this setting, for this system, for this whole concept is Savagery, Quickness, and Resilience. So when they roll their stats, it's kind of just like Cairn where you roll 3d6 and whatever you get. Except that I'm going to allow them to prioritize their stats however they want. So, if you want to make a savage barbarian kind of like crazy dude and you only rolled like a 6 for your savagery, you could swap that around. It doesn't matter to me. And then there's another stat called Avoidance. Now, this is similar to how hit protection works in Cairn, to where it's not your hit points. It's the measure of how much damage you can avoid taking. So I just call it Avoidance. So Avoidance, we roll 2d6 for this, because one thing with Cairn is that it's not really a combat-focused system. So you roll 1d6 for your hit protection, and you could roll a 1, you could roll a 6. I mean, either way, that disappears pretty damn quick. So I decided to do 2d6. To start out with. So whether you get a 2 or you get a 12, right? That's your starting Avoidance. That's just the measure of how much damage you can avoid taking, right? And then that's it. That's it for character creation. That's all you got to do. But you're probably thinking, wait a minute, Axe Wizard, what are my spells? What are my abilities? Do I get to pick weapons? Like, what's the deal? We'll get to that. So once you have characters, the Arbiter will do arena preparation. Now, ideally, this process would be done before you even have your players roll their characters. You would have several arenas ready to go. But, yeah, I'll just read this real quick. All fights are done in an arena, and every arena can be different, from a simple fighting pit in a small town to the Colosseum of Rome. An arena consists of the following: a boundary, entrances, dangers, obstacles, and then you have to specify a favorite attribute. So, a boundary is just basically the, not outer limits of the arena. I'll have to correct that on this little thing here. And so you fight in a limited space, usually no smaller than 5v5 if you're doing a grid, which is what I just typically do. You can even make this work with like graph paper and stuff. But I have I'll probably bring it up on the screen. I have a dry erase marker, like mat or whatever, that I can put on my table that I can draw stuff on, and it's already got squares on it. It's perfect. So I just draw arenas and stuff on that, and it's pretty cool. So you just draw the bounds of the arena. It doesn't have to be a circle. It doesn't have to be an exact square. You can make little nooks and crannies and like little hidey points to where, I don't know, maybe if you get somebody who has like a sling or something, they can hide in a corner slinging stones at people or something, right? Or maybe if you have a guy who has a big ass shield, he can plant himself in a corner and like block everything. There's options there. Entrances. There must be at least one entrance to the arena. And the entrances are important because that's usually where not only the players will enter, it's also where the combatants enter, like your opponents. And then during the fight, depending on if you fail to please the crowd or not, right, there might be some other dangers that get introduced if the crowd is displeased. So entrances are a very important part of an arena. Then there's the dangers, things that may cause harm to the combatants. This could be anything from spikes, hidden pits, other traps, beasts, even enemy gladiators. So, yeah, dangers. You got to have dangers. And then obstacles. These are things that can hinder movements, such as walls, nets, puddles, and mud. I mean, you could technically think of the obstacle, the boundary is an obstacle as well, except it's not, you can't overcome it. You can't escape. And then favored attribute. So this is basically what's used to determine the initiative or the combat order. So I would just default to using the quickness attribute for determining, like, you know, who goes first, right? But depending on the arena, if it has tons of traps and dangers and stuff in it, you know, maybe it's whoever's the most savage can go first, whoever has the higher savagery. If it's something to where there's, you know, adverse conditions to where like it's super hot or really cold or there's snow on the ground or just, you know, something that would just make even just moving around difficult, then I would think resilience would be the favorite attribute that would determine who goes first. So that's my thought there. And then I drew a little like, you know, sample example arena here. So you can see I got spikes on the outside, which are dangers. So you can push like opponents into them and stuff, which can be dangerous. There's a pit in the middle, like a trench that has spikes in it. And there's two little bridges. And there's two entrances on either side. So because there's so many dangers here, I would say the favorite attribute for this is savagery. So there you go. So you could prepare several arenas. And you could even make this on simple graph paper or even just a sheet of blank paper and a pencil, and you can draw the grid yourself. It really doesn't need much, which is cool. Hang on. There we go. I'm still recording, right? Yeah, we're still recording. So then once you have an arena prepared and you have your gladiators rolled up, then it's time to prepare for the fight. So fight preparation, I kind of like the idea of like gladiators when they go in, they're just presented with a random hodgepodge of equipment. Sometimes for certain, like if you wanted to do scenarios, you would pick out the equipment ahead of time and then you might issue them to the gladiators or they might be able to pick from it. But I kind of like the idea of just having random equipment, like random weapons and equipment to play around with. So once you have at least one arena prepared, gladiators will then prepare for combat by doing the following: weapon selection, equipment selection, and then attribute adjustments. Once all gladiators are prepared, glorious combat can commence. So what's the preparation? Weapon selection, right? Before every fight, the arbiter shall do the following. So I have we're going to get to the cards in a bit, but I basically printed out like a 3x3 like set of cards. And basically everything, I'll just bring it up here so you can see what the hell I'm talking about. So here's the ones I'm working on. I made a few changes to the cards themselves, but let's just take a look at like this cudgel here, for example. So the cudgel, just basically a little club, right? So you can see here it's one or two-handed. You can wield it in either way. And the preferred attribute on this is savagery. So you have various abilities that do different things. And you have action points that you can spend, and you also have glory, which we're going to get into later. But these are the cards, right? So basically, when it comes time to pick the weapons, the arbiter is going to take the deck of cards, which, printed on paper, it's not really great. It's really hard to shuffle, but I made do. And then, so I draw a number of cards, and the number that I've settled on so far, you could tweak it as you want. But what I've done so far is I decided to go with, it needs to be at least 3 cards, but ideally 3 more cards than the number of players. So for example, if you got 3 players, you would draw 6 cards. If you've got 8 players, you would draw 11 cards, right? That way it gets enough selection for everybody to have at least 1 weapon, but possibly 2. Because there are one-handed weapons, there's offhand stuff, there's two-hander stuff, there's all sorts of different weapons. As of right now, I've got 18 different weapons, and some weapons are going to be more common than others, and not all weapons are created equal. Some are just awesome, some kind of suck, and if you get the short end of the stick, that's life, right? That kind of sucks. But every weapon has some interesting mechanics that can be good. So that's the first part, weapon selection. So the Arbiter shuffles the deck, draws the number of cards, places them face up on the table, and then the players can browse them as they want, and they can pick what they want. If the players can't compromise on who gets what, then it's going to be determined by Savagery. So whoever has the higher Savagery gets it. If you don't want to do it that way, you could even just do simple contested rolls. Like, hey, you roll D20, you roll D20, who got the higher number? Okay, you get it, right? However the Arbiter wants to handle that, right? But so once they've picked the weapons that they want, then they can move on to the equipment, which is basically armor. But there's some things in there that are not armor. So for example, I've got horses in there. Horses technically equipment. I'm going to add stuff like chariots and things like that. So there could be other stuff that you have that could potentially really enhance your chances, right? So once all gladiators have chosen their weapons, they choose the equipment, and it's a similar thing. I have a deck of cards. I shuffle them up. I put them on the table. They pick what what armor and stuff they get. There's different like armor slots. So for example, there's head, there's chest, there's legs, like lower body, legs and feet, basically. And then there is, that's it for the armor. And then there's some stuff like horses and stuff. So, yeah. So draw at least 4 cards, number of players plus 3, whichever's greater. So put them face up. They choose their equipment. And so you can get an idea of what the equipment looks like. I'm still working on this as well. So you see how some of these have uses? I'm getting rid of those. So this is already a work in progress. But basically the equipment kind of gives you passives, and then some equipment has abilities. Not everyone. So like this padded manica here, this does not have any abilities, but it does give you +2 avoidance and +1 quickness. So these kind of like boost your stats up, and they can also reduce stats. So for example, this bronze manica, +1 armor, +2 resilience, but -2 quickness. And you do have some other abilities that you can use for that, which is kind of neat. So there's a bunch of different armor that I need to add more, but I'm trying to kind of go historical in a way, but still keep it fantasy and fun. But I'm trying to like bring to life the experience of being a freaking gladiator in ancient Rome in a tabletop game. There's probably already something out there, but I didn't do too big of a search, but this is what I came up with. Pretty fun so far. The boys love it. So then once you pick out your equipment, then you have to do, oh my gosh, the attribute adjustments. So then you basically update your character card. This is the character sheet. And I already have to update this because this is already out of date. Armor and then glory. You can have up to 5 glory. We're going to get into that later. But yeah, so you basically just update your stats to make sure it's all good. So once the fighters are prepared, the arena is revealed. And this is where all the gladiators basically enter the arena. You as the arbiter are describing what they see, noting key details such as the arena bounds. How large is the arena? How is it shaped? What obvious dangers are there that they see? What obstacles are there? What are the enemy combatants equipped with? And then any other details you might deem important, such as like weather, the crowd size, or the disposition of them, or if there's any scattered weapons that are around the arena, or anything else might be that, or anything else that might be relevant. So here's an example description an arbiter may provide the gladiators as they set foot into the arena. As you enter the arena, a meager crowd looks on, laughing, jeering, and eagerly awaiting to see how you die. Spikes line the walls, and in the center is a netted area where footing can be perilous. You also spy a pilum and a pugio that lay embedded in the netting. I think it's pugio. Pugio, yeah. You also spy a pilum and a pugio that lay embedded in the netting. Across from you are your opponents, a large man wearing a galea, or a galea. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's basically a freaking helmet, and wielding a spatha and a scutum or scutum. I'm not sure how to pronounce this stuff. And a smaller man wearing a loincloth, wielding a sling in one hand and a sicca in the other. So kind of gives you some insight as to what you're going to face. And then now we determine the combat order. So once the arena has been revealed, the fight begins by determining combat order. So then you basically go by the arena's favorite attribute. So if it's savagery, like for the example of that first arena that I had the example of, you would just go by everyone's savagery. So if Ignacio has a savagery of 13 and then Felix has a savagery of 9, Ignacio would go first, right? And then glorious combat, the fight. Once combat order has been established, the fight can commence. So during a gladiator's turn, basically any combatant's turn, the arbiter handles the other ones. They have 3 action points to spend how they wish. Some actions can use multiple points. Here's a few generic actions that any gladiator can take outside of their abilities that are acquired from their weapons and equipment. So you can move up to 6 squares, 1 action point. Movement may also be affected by equipment or arena obstacles. And there's also some abilities from weapons and equipment that can be combined with the movement action. So you don't have to like waste an action to move and then attack. Sometimes you can move and attack as one if you have an ability that handles that, which is cool. If you don't have any weapons at all, you can always default to doing an unarmed attack for 1 action point, which is 1d4 blunt damage. You can drop an item from your hands. That's 1 action point. You can pick something up. That's another action point. So, for example, if you just get crap luck on the equipment selection or the weapon selection, there's usually weapons that are scattered around the arena that you can quickly go and grab. So you might be able to just drop a weapon and just grab another one, right? And then you're good to go. You can also attempt to shove a combatant. Now, this costs 2 action points, doesn't do any damage, and your target must succeed a resilience roll or be knocked back 1 square. So, for example, if you want to shove someone in some spikes, or shove someone off a bridge into some spikes, or shove someone, off of a King of the Hill match or something like that onto some spikes or something, right? You can do that. It's great. And then a fight is considered over when there's only 1 team remaining in the arena. So now we get into like the gameplay, rolling dice, right? So from first look at this system, like first impressions, it's probably going to seem like you're rolling dice a lot. And then that's intentional. Because again, I made this for my boys. And one of the complaints that they had, one of the things they didn't necessarily like about Cairn is that you don't roll dice as much as you do in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. So, for example, it's like in D&D, you're always doing like perception checks and stuff like that. And it's like, there's no need to do that. You also don't need to roll to hit in Cairn. You just roll the damage dice and then you do damage, right? Whereas this, you roll a bit more. So there's 2 main rolls, technically 3. There's attack rolls, attribute saves, and then damage rolls. But right now we're going to be talking about attack rolls and attribute saves. So whenever you use an ability that makes an attack roll, you roll 2d12. And that 1 die is designated as glory, and the other is designated as disgrace. So this can lead to 5 different outcomes. So critical success If both dice show the same number, for example, 5 and 5, your performance is legendary. You achieve an extraordinary outcome, gaining a significant bonus, such as adding additional damage die for an attack or recovering 1d4 avoidance during a save. You also immediately gain 1 glory point. So, yeah. Glory is a resource that we're going to get into in a little bit. I'm not sure if I structured this in a way that's intuitive or makes sense, so I would love your feedback on this too. So, and then we have successes. You have glorious success and disgraceful success. So, how I do this is, I like the idea of Cairn and being a roll under system. So rather than trying to hit like a target DC or something like that, you're basically trying to roll at or under a specified attribute, whether it's you rolling or somebody like you rolling an attack or a save, and likewise for combatants. So if I'm trying to make an attack with a savagery weapon and I roll 2d12, my savagery is 14, right? Let's just say, for example, and I roll a 5 on the glory die and a 7 on the disgrace die. Combine that together, that's 12 with disgrace. So that'll be a disgraceful success, because it's still underneath the attribute, but I didn't do it in a way. And so one thing I like about this is that my eldest really likes the narrative stuff of like, oh my god, you block it with your shield and you do this right. Like, he likes those descriptions. Whereas my youngest just like, he's just numbers. He just like, is number good, right? So this works for both kind of play styles. So, for example, what would be like an example of a disgraceful success with an attack? Well, maybe it's like your attack hits him, but he partially blocks it, and then maybe he trips or something lame, right? And the crowd's like, boo, right? That'd be a disgraceful success. A glorious success is something like, oh my god, you go to attack him and you just beat the shit out of him, right? That would be glorious, right? And then failures, there are ways to gloriously fail as well, or disgracefully fail, which is, but either way, the point of this stuff is it gives you glory if you have a glorious success, or it gives the arbiter disgrace if you have a disgrace. So I kind of took that idea from Daggerheart. I really like the 2d12 system. I kind of struggled on what I wanted to use for the dice. I was thinking 2d10. I was even thinking like, okay, what if you just roll 2d20 and then just pick the higher number? Like, hey, if I rolled a 13 on glory and then I rolled a 7 on disgrace, what if it's like a 13 with glory? But I was like, that doesn't work well with the under system. I decided to stick with the 2d12. The reason being is that the attributes are capped at 18 base, and then when you add your equipment, that can make it, you could potentially go above 20 of an attribute. So rolling 2d12 gives you up to 24. So that's a bit of room, and it seems to be working well so far. So that's why I picked that. In addition to the actions that you can take, when it's not your turn, I like the idea of reactions and stuff from D&D and Pathfinder. So you have one reaction that you can use, and it's refreshed whenever your turn starts. Again, it can't be used on your turn, but you have one reaction. And your equipment and stuff gives you some reactions. So, for example, this bronze manica has a reaction called Blade Ward. Upon a successful resilience roll, any incoming slash damage is negated, right? Pretty cool. So you could use that as a reaction to potentially mitigate slashing damage. So that's just one example. And then there's also things you could do. I do have some really interesting reactions in here. I'm still fleshing them out, but there are some pretty interesting reactions. So, for example, like the trident weapon, I had a reaction. I think I reworked it already, but I had a reaction where you could basically catch a slashing attack, and you could potentially disarm your opponent. Pretty cool stuff. So, let's talk about taking damage. How does taking damage work? Because this is another thing that I kind of took from Cairn and made it my own. So armor, whenever you take damage, you must first subtract your armor value from it. So if I took 6 damage and I have 3 armor, I took 3 damage, right? Because 6 minus 3 is 3. And then after you mitigate it with armor, it first applies to your avoidance, which is again the measure of not taking damage. So once your avoidance is at 0, you don't die. That's not your hit points. That's your measure of how much you can avoid taking damage. Then you start taking damage to your resilience. So this is kind of like in Cairn, how once you're out of hit protection, you start taking damage to your strength. I decided to go with resilience for this. So once your resilience reaches 0, then you're dead. Now, Daggerheart has some options for like a last stand thing that you can kind of do. And I'm going to talk about that when we do glory, when we talk about glory, but it's not going to be the same as Daggerheart, but there is going to be some option if provided you have some glory. So that's how it works. You first, the incoming damage is mitigated by armor, then it hits avoidance. Once you're out of avoidance, it hits your resilience. Once your resilience is at 0, you dead. So death is a very real thing in this game. I think my characters rolled I think my players rolled a few characters on the last play session because they kept taking risks. So now let's talk about glory and disgrace. Probably the main, I guess, mechanic of this system, I suppose. So glory is a resource for combatants that has a few uses. So glory cannot exceed 5 points for any one person. And there's a few ways that you could use glory. So first of all, the abilities from your weapons. So for example, some of these require glory. So you can see here, smash, this melee attack, costs 1 action point and 3 glory. And if the target's armor is above 0, reduce it by 1 until the end of the fight, which is pretty huge. So you could keep beating the shit out of some guy and reduce his armor, because it's unlike Cairn, where armor is capped at 3. I don't have a cap on armor. So you could get lucky with equipment and be a walking tank, but someone could still beat your ass. So pretty cool. So you could use abilities. Some require glory as a resource as well. So you can use that. Also, again, not all weapons are made equal. Sometimes you just might get a boring weapon that doesn't really have any glory options for it, or any great ones. So if you don't have that, you can always amplify your damage. So you can always, so once you hit with an attack, when it comes time to roll your damage, you can choose to add glory points as damage. So for example, if I've got 5 glory points just banked, and I'm sitting here punching a guy in the face with my fist doing 1d4 blunt damage, and the dude's got 5 armor, and I roll a 4, I might want to pump all my glory into that and bump that up to 9 so I still hit him, and then, you know, I could knock him out. So there is that option there. Alternatively, you can choose to re-roll any type of dice, whether it's an attack roll, an attribute save, or even a damage roll. You can spend 3 glory to re-roll, but you have to take the second result. So, is what it is. And then finally, last stand. When a combatant suffers a mortal blow that brings their resilience to 0, all of their glory is consumed to bring their resilience to 1. And they cannot take damage until the start of their next turn. Requires at least 1 glory point to use, but it uses all of the glory that you have. And you can only use it once per fight. So, pretty cool there. And then Disgrace is the flip side. This is the resource that the Arbiter gets. And Disgrace is a measure of the cloud's displeasure. And it can be used by the Arbiter to perform a few actions between any combatant's turn. Now, I have it in bold here. These actions are designed to make the fight more exciting for the crowd and usually introduces more dangers that affect all combatants, not just the players. So it's not a tool for the Arbiter to just beat the crap out of their players with. It's basically the crowd is bored. You got to keep the crowd happy. You got to keep the mob happy. And what do they like? They like blood and chaos. So introduce some blood and chaos. So there are some things that the Arbiter can choose to do whenever it fits. So, jeer costs 1 disgrace. If a combatant's performance is cowardly, the crowd might boo at them, often throwing random food and debris. The target takes 1d4 damage from the crowd. So this is intended to be used like if you just have somebody who, let's say they're not fighting, like they're just hiding in a corner behind a shield. Crowd might not like that. They might start throwing rocks and shit from above. He can't block that. Now, target takes 1d4 damage. There's no roll to hit with this. You just take it. Now, it's still mitigated by armor and avoidance if you have it, but there's no roll to hit. This is something that can be done. So this is more up to the Arbiter's discretion to use, and it's meant to just kind of jostle combatants who aren't playing by the rules, you know what I'm saying? Kind of like a warning, like a gentle nudge saying, hey, get in there and fight. Make us happy, right? There's also an action you can, as the Arbiter, do, which costs 2 disgrace, which is called Try This. Draw a random weapon card, and then draw or use a marker, or place it on your map in a neutral location. So kind of put it somewhere to where both sides can access it, both the combatants and the players and whatever other dangers are in there. Kind of put it like right in the middle of all of them, where somebody can get to it, but it doesn't clearly favor one person or the other, right? But you can do this at your discretion, right? If your players are having a hard time and maybe they drew some really shitty weapons, you could throw a good weapon down to them, and then they'll have to make the choice whether do I use an action point to drop my weapon and another action point to pick it up? Is it worth that? Or am I going to die, right? So that is one thing you can do to add some flavor to the match as well. Next, there's Unveil Trap, which costs 3 disgrace, and it adds a small trap to the arena. Usually only affects one unoccupied square on the battle map, though. So some examples of traps might be spikes, pits, like swinging blades, whatever. Traps usually deal 2d4 damage to any combatant that touches them. Again, this is not an attack roll. If you touch it, you take this damage, 2d4 damage. And then there's Into the Fray, which costs 5 disgrace. Add another combatant that is hostile to all the other combatants. They will attack players and enemies alike. Combatants can be other gladiators or even beasts such as lions, boars, wolves, etc. So if the fight's getting boring, add a bit of chaos in there. You know, if it can also be funny. So where, so in the last game I played with my boys, I unleashed some tigers in there, and the tigers were like right next to basically everybody. So I had 4 options for who the tiger would attack. So I just basically said, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I rolled a 1d4. So, okay, 3, sorry, dude, he's attacking you, right? Because they're hostile to like any other of the existing combatants. So that's the ideal there. And then last one, which costs 6 disgrace, is Shield Wall. If a fight has gone on for too long, the Arbiter can decide to have soldiers, not combatants, players cannot fight them, form a line on the farthest wall and advance 1 square closer at the end of every round of combat. Any combatants adjacent to the shield wall will take 1d8 damage. Again, can be blocked. So the idea is that if a fight's just going on, maybe you've got somebody who keeps running away, like maybe he has a horse and he just keeps moving out of the range of like the other combatant and nothing's really happening. It's just getting boring. you can save up some disgrace, and then you could drop this fucking shield wall and watch everybody panic because it's like, oh shit, it's getting real. So you have like this wall of like legionnaires or something like that that keep moving closer after every round of combat, not every turn, every round of combat. And so, yeah, that one's fun. Now, to help with the balancing of spending disgrace, the cost is scaled by the number of the player-controlled gladiators. So if I have 3 players, Jeer doesn't cost 1 disgrace, it costs 3 disgrace. And the reason being is that if you have a lot more combatants, you got a lot more chance to get disgrace. And dropping a shield wall for 6 disgrace, that could be like 2 turns, depending on how shit they roll, right? So this is a resource that the Arbiter could use to make things more interesting if the crowd is growing bored, right? Because at the end of the day, as a gladiator, you want to make the crowd happy, right? And then, so finally, let's talk about death. And then we're going to end this rambling video here pretty quick. But this is the main part of the vicious spectacle that draws in the crowds. When a combatant's resilience reaches 0 and they have no glory to perform a last stand, they are dead. Whoever dealt the killing blow gains 3 glory points. The fallen also drop their weapons on the ground and they can be picked up by other combatants. If a player's gladiator dies, they are out of the fight and they will have to make another gladiator before the next fight. So the reason why character creation is so simple is because you're expendable. In like historically, you were a slave who had to fight and die. That was kind of a shitty thing to say, but that's kind of what it was back in the day. And so, yeah, you are expendable. So your gladiator can die easily. So whether it's victory or defeat, the players will return all the weapons and equipment cards to the Arbiter, and the players will reset their character sheets. All attributes will return to their base values. And if a gladiator died, they'll just roll a new character. And then training and downtime. So what happens when you finish a fight? You get ready for the next one. You're a slave. You're a fighter. Do it, right? So the time between fights is considered downtime. However, for a gladiator, this simply means that you train for the next fight. So how I decided to have some progression into this to keep it interesting is if you have a gladiator that keeps surviving and becomes more like stronger and stronger, I want like the end goal to be like a champion gladiator. Like that'd be kick-ass. That'd be a cool fantasy to have. Like be a beastly ass gladiator stomping fools, right? That'd be awesome. So each player will choose 1 attribute that they wish to attempt to improve, and they will roll 2d12. If the result is greater than the attribute, it increases by 1. The maximum base value of any attribute is 18. Only equipment may raise an attribute higher than the cap. So the reason why I chose higher than is that if you have a super low stat, you have a greater chance of increasing it. But the higher you get, the slower that goes. So if I'm at 17 savagery and I'm just trying to get that 18th savagery point, I got to roll 2d12 and the combined total has to be above 17. If it's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, my savagery is now 18 and it's maxed. So then I can work on upgrading another stat. So potentially, depending on how long you decide to keep these fights up, you could have 18 in every stat and be a walking god, which is pretty cool. So I like that idea, and it's simple enough. And again, the system is just, it's all about the combat. There's some story there because maybe you're fighting to buy your freedom. And then what happens after you are free? Who knows? Maybe you start a campaign in a different system, right? So yeah. Anyway, that's the system I made for my boys. I'm still working on it. Once I finish reworking the weapons and the equipment and getting the cards redone. And then I will I'll put it up on itch.io and you guys can playtest it. But what do you guys think so far? Does Zeta's rambling make sense? Does it seem like an interesting concept? What are some pitfalls that you see with this system? I'll be the first to admit so far that when we're playtesting it, there are some clunky bits. But I noticed that my boys like having cards in their hand because it's much easier to focus on. Because I noticed that with my boys, like if they're playing D&D or Pathfinder and they just have a big ass character sheet, their eyes just kind of glaze over and they just end up spending their turn doing the same attack every time. Right? Not exactly great. But if they have a card and they can kind of look through their deck like, oh my god, I'm going to die. Do I have anything that can save me? No, I don't. Right? So that's the idea. The cards have been a big hit. I would love to eventually, at least just for myself, have like an actual printed deck of cards once I get everything finalized. But I'm excited for the art that my oldest is going to do for it. And I'm already working on having it in booklet form. So you can see I got the booklet here, like ready to be printed out as a booklet. So you can fold it and staple it or whatever, like just like this Guards Adventure. So should be fun. Anyway. Enough of me rambling. What are your thoughts? What do you think about this? Is it fun? Do you want to try it? So I will, I'll make another video, or at the very least, I'll put a comment on this video once I have it there. If you want to follow me on itch.io to see what good stuff I got going on, I'm just AxeWizard BGG. That's Beards, Games, Guitars, baby. So that's my itch.io. I've done a few things. So my Guards Adventure for Cairn first edition is on there. There's a few other games that me and my boys created for game jams. And then there's a second edition calendar that I also made because it was interesting. So I did that. But yeah, you can check out all this stuff. I will eventually have my Gladiators, Glory and Disgrace stuff on here as well, so you can check it out. So yeah, again, please let me know your thoughts, and I'm excited to have some people playtest this, not just me and my boys. We're having fun with it, but yeah, could use some more ideas for sure. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you in whatever video I make next, whenever I make it. Thank you.